where Thomas Markle is still rehabilitating, having begged his daughter publicly for a visit or a phone call. What possible excuse could these two have?
Thomas Markle had spoken about his daughter before, but this time his words carried a darker weight. He was not simply reopening an old family wound. He was claiming Meghan had received a private warning before her royal life changed and deliberately walked toward the danger anyway. This was not another complaint about a missing invitation, an unanswered phone call, or the painful silence that had stretched between father and daughter. Thomas was preparing to expose something far more unsettling. According to him, there had been a private conversation before Meghan's romance with Prince Harry became a global obsession, before palace gates closed around her, and before every family disagreement became international news. The warning, he suggested, had never been meant for cameras. It belonged to a time when Meghan could still make decisions without royal advisors, public pressure, or millions of strangers judging every move. Thomas claimed he had tried to speak to her not as a critic, but as a father who believed he could see danger approaching long before she did. That claim instantly changed the nature of the family conflict. Inside Meghan's private world, it threatened to reopen memories she may have believed were buried. Inside royal circles, it carried another kind of threat. The palace had seen personal disputes become weapons before, but this allegation suggested Meghan had entered royal life already aware that certain choices could destroy the relationships around her. Thomas himself appeared caught between several identities. He was the wounded father who felt abandoned. He was the angry outsider who believed his side had been ignored. But he was also the keeper of private conversations, old warnings, and emotional details that Meghan could not easily erase. And the darker possibility was that his warning had not only concerned the monarchy. It may also have concerned Meghan's own instincts, her determination to control difficult situations, her fear of losing authority over her public image, and her willingness to distance herself from anyone who might complicate the future she was building. Meghan's silence now became both protection and risk. By refusing to respond, she denied Thomas the confrontation he may have wanted. Yet every hour without an answer allowed his version to grow stronger, spreading through headlines and private conversations without resistance. Harry may have viewed the interview as another calculated attack on his wife. Publicly, his loyalty would seem unquestionable. Privately, however, a more troubling question could have begun to surface. Had Meghan ever told him the full story of what Thomas warned her about before everything changed? Because the warning appeared to involve a choice Meghan would face again and again: protect the fragile bonds of family, or seize control of the story before someone else controlled it for her. But to understand why Thomas believed his warning mattered, the story must return to the moment when Meghan's future still appeared dazzling, and the dangers surrounding it remained almost invisible. Before the titles, security details, palace briefings, and relentless headlines, Meghan stood at the edge of a transformation few people ever experience. To the world, it looked like a modern fairy tale. To those who knew her privately, it may have looked more like a door that locked from the inside. Her relationship with Harry was no longer a private romance protected by distance and secrecy. It was becoming serious, and with that seriousness came an entirely different set of pressures. Meghan was not simply entering a relationship with a man she loved. She was moving closer to an institution that measured every friendship, every relative, and every private weakness according to the danger it might create. For Meghan, the future must have appeared extraordinary. A new life was opening before her, filled with influence, attention, and the promise of becoming part of history. Yet among those she had known before Harry, excitement was slowly mixing with unease. Some relatives feared they were no longer being treated as family. They were being assessed as risks. Royal courtship demanded discretion. Conversations could not remain casual. Public comments carried consequences. Loyalty was expected, but access had to be controlled. Meghan was learning that even ordinary family tensions could become institutional vulnerabilities once reporters, advisors, and palace officials entered the equation. Thomas allegedly watched this transformation with growing concern. He knew his daughter's confidence, ambition, and determination. Those qualities had carried her through years of uncertainty. But he may also have feared they would convince her she could master a system built on centuries of tradition, silence, and obedience. Questions began forming around the people closest to her. Who could be trusted? Who might speak without permission? Which relative could create an embarrassing headline? Every answer seemed to narrow Meghan's circle further. From her perspective, distance may have felt necessary. It protected Harry, preserved her new position, and reduced the chances of another private matter becoming public. Thomas saw something different. To him, the silence suggested that royal life was changing Meghan before she had even fully entered it. Harry's protective instincts intensified that divide. Each criticism of Meghan appeared to confirm his belief that the couple was surrounded by people willing to exploit them. The more outside voices questioned their decisions, the more tightly Harry and Meghan seemed to close ranks. Protection became isolation, and isolation began to feel like loyalty. Yet there was still a brief moment when the damage was not permanent. Conversations could have been repaired. Misunderstandings could have been confronted before resentment hardened into betrayal. It was during that narrowing window, Thomas would later suggest, that he decided Meghan needed to hear the warning she might not forgive him for giving. And as wedding plans, palace expectations, and public pressure began tightening around Meghan, one private conversation allegedly forced her to confront the future she was refusing to imagine. It was not a dramatic palace confrontation or a message delivered through royal lawyers. According to Thomas, the warning came during a private family exchange, stripped of ceremony and cameras. Yet the words allegedly spoken that day would later echo through estrangement, interviews, lawsuits, and accusations of betrayal. The timing, Thomas suggested, was crucial. Meghan's relationship with Harry had moved beyond secrecy, and the possibility of royal marriage no longer felt distant. Her future was taking shape quickly. Decisions that once belonged only to her were now being examined through the colder demands of reputation, protocol, and public survival. Thomas allegedly believed this was his last chance to speak before every concern he raised could be dismissed as interference. He did not present himself as a royal expert. He claimed he was speaking as a father who recognized something familiar in the way Meghan handled pressure. When conflict entered her life, she did not simply endure it. She acted decisively, created distance, and tried to regain control. But Meghan may have entered the exchange already guarded. From her point of view, relatives could not fully understand what was happening around her. They did not face the same scrutiny. They did not carry Harry's fear of the press or the palace's demand for absolute discretion. Advice that sounded simple from the outside may have felt dangerously naive from within. That was where the emotional divide deepened. Thomas allegedly believed family loyalty should survive humiliation, mistakes, and public embarrassment. Meghan may have believed loyalty without boundaries could become a trap. To her, separation may not have meant cruelty. It may have meant protecting the life she was fighting to build. Thomas, however, reportedly pushed further. He raised the possibility that Meghan was cutting people off too quickly whenever they became difficult, unpredictable, or damaging to her image. What he may have intended as concern could have landed as accusation. After years of complicated family relationships, Meghan may have heard judgment rather than love. Then came the more disturbing layer. Thomas allegedly warned that isolation would not only weaken her family ties, it could also make her easier for the royal institution to manage. Once old relationships disappeared, palace officials, advisors, and royal expectations could become the only voices surrounding her. The fewer people she trusted outside that system, the more power the system would hold inside her life. According to Thomas, Meghan did not misunderstand him. She heard the concern, understood the choice before her, and still believed her new future demanded a different kind of loyalty, one built around Harry, protection, and control rather than obligation to those she feared might pull her backward. Then, Thomas finally revealed the message at the heart of the dispute, a warning that was not merely about the monarchy, but about what Meghan might become while trying to survive it. Thomas's alleged warning was brutally simple. Do not erase your family to satisfy the palace, because one day the palace may erase you. He claimed Meghan was told that surrendering old loyalties for royal acceptance would leave her exposed, isolated, and dependent on people whose support could vanish without warning. According to Thomas, he was not asking Meghan to ignore every family mistake or tolerate every betrayal. He was urging her not to destroy old connections merely because they threatened the polished image expected of a future royal. Embarrassment could be repaired, distance could be temporary. But once every bridge was burned, returning might become impossible. His warning carried a colder message about the monarchy. Thomas allegedly believed the institution would welcome silence, discipline, and separation from controversy because those things protected the crown. Meghan might be praised for controlling difficult relatives and obeying the demands of royal life, yet that approval would never be unconditional. In Thomas's telling, royal acceptance depended on usefulness, hierarchy, and public perception. As long as Meghan strengthened the institution, doors might remain open. But if her presence became more damaging than valuable, the same system that had encouraged distance from her past could create distance from her. That was the most painful part. Thomas allegedly warned that if Meghan removed everyone who had known her before the titles, she would lose the people who remembered her without royal status. Then, if palace support disappeared, she would have no secure place to return to, only fractured relationships, unanswered questions, and relatives who no longer trusted her. Meghan's alleged response was equally direct. Trust, she believed, had already been damaged. Certain relatives had spoken publicly, crossed boundaries, or created risks she could no longer accept. Distance was not abandonment in her eyes. It was self-defense. Harry became both her shield and the force that sharpened the separation. His instinct was to protect Meghan from anyone he believed was exploiting her. Each criticism strengthened the couple's belief that they could rely only on each other. Their unity became powerful, but it also made every outside voice feel hostile. Later, the warnings seemed to follow them through their royal departure, public accusations, media battles, and growing estrangement from both families. The more pressure they faced, the more heavily they depended on one shared account of what had happened and who was responsible. Thomas's revelation did not prove that he had acted correctly. It raised a more disturbing possibility. Meghan may have ignored him because she believed she could control both the family conflict and the palace system surrounding her. And Thomas may not have been the only person who tried to stop her. Another relative, he suggested, had also urged Meghan to slow down before the division became permanent. But the warning's most explosive implication was still ahead. Because Thomas was not only accusing Meghan of abandoning her family, he was claiming the palace quietly benefited from the separation. The monarchy did not need to order Meghan to cut anyone off. According to the darker interpretation of Thomas's account, it only needed to make every family complication feel like a threat. Once fear replaced trust, Meghan would begin closing doors herself, and the institution would remain publicly blameless. Royal households survive by controlling uncertainty. Access is limited. Conversations are managed. Unexpected voices are kept far from official decisions. In that world, an unpredictable relative is not viewed only as a difficult family member. They can be treated as a threat to reputation, security, and the carefully protected image of the crown. That may have shaped the way palace advisors viewed Meghan's family problems. What she experienced as heartbreak, humiliation, and emotional conflict could have appeared to them as a public relations crisis requiring containment. Their task was not to repair damaged relationships, it was to prevent those relationships from damaging the institution. Every interview, private message, or embarrassing disclosure would have strengthened the argument for tighter boundaries. Meghan may have been told that direct contact carried risks, that reconciliation could create fresh headlines, and that silence was the safest response. With each controversy, the circle around her became smaller. For Meghan, the pressure must have been suffocating. She was angry at relatives who spoke publicly, humiliated by stories she could not control, and increasingly convinced that opening the door again would only invite another betrayal. Reconciliation no longer looked healing. It looked dangerous. The palace may not have created the fracture, but it could have found the separation convenient. Fewer uncontrolled relatives meant fewer surprises, fewer leaks, and fewer emotional complications for advisors to manage. Meghan's isolation protected the system, even if it quietly damaged her. Harry's distrust made the divide even deeper. He already believed the press could destroy lives, and that the royal machine often protected itself before protecting individuals. When Meghan felt attacked, his response was to close ranks. He supported distance because distance appeared to offer safety. Yet this created a painful contradiction. Harry and Meghan may have believed they were resisting palace control, but they began using the same methods associated with it: silence, restricted access, exclusion, and careful management of the public story. They escaped the institution physically while carrying some of its habits with them. Thomas claimed his warning was not fulfilled when Meghan entered royal life. It was fulfilled when she left. She had broken away from the monarchy, but the family relationships sacrificed along the way had not been restored. The safe place he warned she might lose was still missing. Now his accusation demanded a response. Harry may have wanted to attack it, Meghan may have preferred silence, and legal action could have risked exposing even more private history. As the accusation spread, the central question moved from what Thomas had said years earlier to what Meghan and Harry were prepared to do now that the warning had become public. For Harry, Thomas's claim created a trap with no clean escape. Defending Meghan too aggressively could give the allegation greater attention. Remaining silent could look like confirmation. But privately challenging her account risked reopening the deepest wound in their marriage, who had truly understood the cost of leaving everything behind. Harry's first instinct would have been familiar and immediate: protect Meghan. He had watched criticism around her grow into something he believed was relentless, personal, and cruel. To him, Thomas's revelation may have appeared less like a father's warning and more like another public strike against a woman already carrying years of family conflict. Yet this allegation was harder to dismiss because its message may have touched something painfully close to Harry's own life. He understood what it meant to separate from an institution that had shaped his identity. He also understood the shock of discovering that freedom did not automatically create belonging somewhere else. Thomas's warning suggested that Meghan might one day lose both worlds. Harry had already lived a version of that fear. His royal role had been left behind, but the emotional distance from his father, brother, and wider family had not simply disappeared. The parallel was uncomfortable. Meghan had broken from relatives she described as unsafe, while Harry had broken from a system he believed had failed them both. That made one question impossible to ignore. Had Meghan told him about Thomas's warning when it was first delivered? Or had she shared only the parts that supported her belief that distance was necessary? Even asking could feel like betrayal. Their marriage had survived through a powerful shared conviction that they had protected each other when others would not. If Harry questioned her version now, he risked disturbing the foundation beneath every sacrifice they had made together. Meghan may have feared that any public answer would make the crisis worse. Denying Thomas's account could invite messages, dates, witnesses, or further private claims. Confronting him might reopen the very history she had spent years trying to contain. Silence offered control, but only at a price. Harry may have begun wondering whether that strategy still worked. Silence once appeared to deny critics oxygen. Now it could allow them to define the couple's motives without resistance. Every unanswered allegation threatened to become accepted truth. Their sacrifices had bound them together. Harry surrendered his royal role. Meghan abandoned relationships she believed had become damaging. But beneath that unity remained a darker question. What would be left if the story they had built around those choices began to fracture? And the palace was watching. Because Thomas's claim threatened to expose family estrangement not as a side effect of the Sussex story, but as one of its central forces. And behind palace walls, Thomas's revelation was being interpreted through a colder lens, less as a family tragedy, and more as evidence in a long-running struggle over trust, credibility, and royal return. The palace did not need to respond publicly. Silence had always been one of its most effective weapons, yet Thomas's claim gave royal insiders something more valuable than a headline. A warning from Meghan's own past that appeared to mirror the accusations now surrounding her relationship with the monarchy. Behind closed doors, courtiers may have examined the allegation with cold precision. To them, Thomas's account could reinforce concerns they had carried for years about Meghan's response to pressure, disagreement, and divided loyalty. What appeared publicly as another painful family dispute might privately be treated as evidence of a pattern. Some senior royals may have concluded that the Sussex crisis did not begin inside the palace at all. Perhaps, they believed, the tensions that later erupted around protocol, hierarchy, and trust had already existed before Meghan entered royal life. The monarchy may not have created those fractures. It may simply have given them a larger stage. For Charles, the situation carried a more personal danger. Any public reaction could deepen the conflict, yet ignoring Thomas's words might allow them to shape future conversations with Harry. Reconciliation was already fragile. Another dispute involving loyalty, abandonment, and family silence could make every attempted step forward feel like a trap. William's possible view may have been less emotional. Private warnings, once ignored, often return as public consequences. From that perspective, the institution could not continue absorbing the damage created whenever unresolved family conflicts spilled into headlines. Sympathy had limits. So did royal patience. Catherine's silence would carry its own meaning. It did not necessarily suggest agreement with Thomas. It could simply reflect a refusal to enter another deeply personal battle where every response might be twisted into hostility or judgment. Palace advisors would also understand the risk of provoking Meghan. If she answered Thomas by exposing fresh claims about royal behavior, the dispute could expand far beyond one father and daughter. It could become a wider argument over who abandoned whom, who created the isolation, and who benefited from it. The stakes reached beyond reputation. Archie and Lilibet would one day inherit competing histories, one shaped by their parents, another preserved by estranged relatives, and a third protected by the palace. Which version would they believe? Thomas's warning had become larger than Meghan herself. It now raised a brutal question about the monarchy. Do powerful institutions destroy families, or do damaged families carry their unresolved wounds into powerful institutions? Meghan could reopen contact, release her own account, or remain silent. But each path threatened to define her legacy in a different way. The controversy had now reached the point Thomas may have intended all along, forcing Meghan to choose between protecting her silence and confronting the family history she had spent years trying to leave behind. Thomas's warning was no longer trapped in the past. It had become a verdict hanging over Meghan's present. If she answered him, she risked exposing painful details. If she remained silent, his version could harden into accepted history. Either choice threatened the identity she had fought to protect. The decision Meghan once allegedly believed would secure her future had returned with unexpected force. Cutting ties may have offered immediate protection from embarrassment, leaks, and public conflict, but the past had not disappeared. It had waited. Now it threatened to shape how the world remembered every choice that followed. Her first option was private reconciliation. A call to Thomas could reopen a door that had remained closed for years, but even compassion would carry danger. Critics might call it strategy. Supporters might call it healing. Others could interpret the contact as proof that his allegation had reached a vulnerable place. A controlled, public rebuttal offered clarity, but not safety. Meghan could challenge his account, explain the boundaries she believed were necessary, and defend the decisions that protected her marriage. Yet any denial might invite Thomas to release further details, turning a family wound into a battle of messages, dates, and competing memories. Continued silence appeared simpler. It would deny the accusation an official response, but silence could no longer erase the story. It might allow Thomas's version to settle into public memory until allegation and accepted history became almost impossible to separate. Time made every choice heavier. Permanent estrangement was no longer an abstract possibility. Each passing year reduced the chance of restoring trust, apologizing without cameras, or speaking before anger became the only language either side remembered. Harry now stood beside Meghan with the loyalty that had defined their marriage, but even he may have begun recognizing that family history cannot be removed by refusing to discuss it. What remained buried for adults could one day become unavoidable for their children. Archie and Lilibet may eventually ask why entire branches of their family existed only through hostile interviews, legal disputes, and distant headlines. Their questions could force Meghan and Harry to confront what silence had protected, and what it had cost. Thomas's warning, then, was not a victory. Even if he believed events proved him right, exposing the message publicly may have destroyed the trust required for reconciliation. The palace, meanwhile, remained standing in the background, surviving another crisis while individuals carried the emotional damage. Perhaps Meghan never truly forgot his words. Perhaps she remembered them during every separation, every accusation, and every closed door. She may even have feared they were becoming true, yet continued, because turning back seemed more dangerous than moving forward. And Thomas may still hold the final threat, private messages, exact dates, or remembered responses capable of revealing what Meghan said when she first heard the warning. Because the most damaging revelation may not be that Meghan received the warning, it may be that Thomas can still prove she understood precisely what she was risking when she chose to ignore it.